Welcome one and all. Step right up and get your tickets for another moment in gaming history. Hey guys, welcome back to the channel, or if you're new here, welcome officially to the channel. This is a series where we go into various different moments in video game history, and today I want to talk about something that's pretty much a staple in video games, something that goes back almost as far as the genre of video games, and that's the video game boss. Everyone who's played a video game has run into a boss encounter, but they don't always have them as a staple. But what was the first one? When did it show up? Well, if you have a minute, hang out and let's take a look at the first video game boss and their influence on games as a whole. Most of us had our first video game boss encounter early. Some of us as early as Donkey Kong, with you playing Jumpman as he tries to make his way up to the top of the scaffolding, all the while Donkey Kong himself throwing barrels down at our plucky hero. You may not think of this as a boss fight, but in a way it is. He stands as the primary obstacle between you and your main goal. Another example is something along the lines of Bowser, who has kidnapped Princess Peach, usually posing a challenge at the end of each world. They're intended to provide a final challenge to the game or stage, proving as a testing ground for all the skills and abilities that the players gained up until that point. Most times, these are some of the most exciting and thrilling parts of an entire game, where developers can show off their creativity and push the player, engaging with them in ways that would make things too challenging or difficult through the normal stage. With all this said, let's go back further than I often do these days in this channel, to the first time a boss was included in a video game. Not surprisingly, one of the first games to have a boss in it was simply D&D. No, not the pen and paper version, the computer version for the Plato computer system. Plato standing for Programmed Logic for Automated Teaching Operations. The game was designed by Gary Wishut and Ray Wood at the University of Southern Illinois in 1974-1975 before continuing development with other people along the lines. The idea was simple: make a D&D-like experience that you could play on the computer. To that end, the player would roll a character and enter into the dungeon, and from what I could tell, there really wasn't a class system in this version. The technology was just too new. For its time, though, this was a fairly advanced game. Characters could travel between levels of the dungeon and even go out of the dungeon and back in, which is pretty common these days, but at the time this was one of the earliest examples of non-linear progression in a video game. And you would need to use this kind of progression, because spells would have to be refreshed, and the only way to do that would be to leave the dungeon and rest. Yes, I'm aware all the two people that follow my channel that are into D&D are rolling their eyes and going, duh. Yeah, it's a common mechanic in almost all pen and paper RPGs to rest to refresh spells, but it's not so common in video games. If you were good enough and could make it through all the levels of the dungeon, which is a feat, because if you died your character was done, and you would have to re-roll and start all over again. You would come face to face with the fearsome golden dragon who guarded the ultimate treasure, so known simply as the Orb. This was the final stage and boss level. The monster was the first boss in history of video games. There wasn't much to him outside of, being a dragon, which meant high damage output and a good likelihood of wrecking your day, but it was a start, and a setup for the tradition of epic climactic battles that signaled the end of many a game where players would get their ultimate challenge and be given the satisfaction of seeing the completion of the game if they succeeded. It's safe to say that this game had a heavy influence on gaming as a whole. Pushing players with this final boss helped set expectations for more such encounters in games. And while games would for a while still go solely on score-driven based models, many a game would add bosses at the end of stages, signaling an end to the stage and testing the player with the final boss of those games, providing the most grand spectacle that the developers were capable of, and that we still love today. Think of the number of times that you've talked about a boss fight that particularly stuck out in your mind. A lot of that is owed to this game. However, what did you guys think of this one? Is this a cool moment and a start for bosses in video games? Did any of you ever emulate this or try it? And yes, I mean emulation, as it's the only way to play anything that was on the Plato system these days. If so, let me know in the comments. However, for now, thank you so much for watching and spending part of your day with me. If I could ask you for one more favor, please leave this video a like. And if you haven't, consider subscribing. That helps me out a ton. For now though, thank you once again, and until next time, happy gaming.